I'm pretty sure there were many Trump supporters who thought when push came to shove, police officers would stand for their oath to the Constitution and defend the constitutional rights of the citizenry. Many of these individuals are now getting a rude awakening as Trump supporters and anti-lockdown protesters marched in several states and the police attacked them. I'll tell you, one of the craziest things is a photo of a guy, what he appears to be throwing back some kind of tear gas or smoke bomb of some sorts. And it's a right-wing dude. I didn't expect to see this anytime soon. It's typically what you see from the left when they fight cops. But now that Trump supporters and many right-wing individuals who are opposing the lockdowns are coming out and saying, you don't have a right to do this to governors, they're learning the cops don't care. Now, I've heard from some people that many of the good cops have quit. It's actually true. There's been a mass exodus from various police forces, cops who don't want to enforce these laws, don't want to be in these places, and are not getting support from the government. So what do you end up with? Let me ask you something. If you have police officers, okay, during the George Floyd riots, they're screaming defund the police in your face. So these cops quit and say, I've got no support. Nobody wants us here. Fine, we're gone. If you have unconstitutional edict and you have officers saying, I'm not going to enforce that, and they say, well, then you can quit. Okay, fine, I quit. Who do you think is left? The people who say, I don't care about any oath of the Constitution. The people who say, I don't care if people like me or not. Give me that sweet paycheck. I'm sure there are a lot of cops that are thinking to themselves, I can see the other side, the people who have lost their jobs. I can see those marching in the streets because their businesses have been shut down and they're desperate. And I'll be damned if I'll be one of them. Give me the money so I'll put down the boot. That's what they're doing. These people don't care about you. They don't care about your rights. I think it's really funny, too, because the left is now tweeting at me like, the right wingers are starting to realize the police are bad or whatever. And it's like, bro, I've ragged on police many times. OK, I just don't think all cops are bad. That's a stupid statement. We can talk about institutions of policing that have corruption problems. We can talk about cops getting away with things because people are scared to go against them, to snitch on them, as it were. But for the most part, I've met good cops. I've been saved by good cops. I've been helped by them. I've had reasonable cops pull me over before and just say, you know, like, I'll tell you this, man, I've had bad cops pull me over and I have good cops pull me over because they're people. And it's just the way life is. Not a fan for the most part. I think we need police reform. And now more than ever, I think we are in serious trouble. Here's a story from the Daily Mail. MAGA fans clash with cops in protests across the country as Trump claims Georgia runoffs are illegal and invalid because of the unconstitutional voting process. Now, we'll get to the Georgia portion of this in a minute. The most important thing I think y'all need to see is these Trump supporters coming out demanding that everything get reopened, that their businesses be allowed to come back. In many jurisdictions, they've actually won court cases. I think in Texas, the governor or the state government is stopping Austin from locking down. And why are these cities locking down anyway? We've seen in New York, for instance, that transmission rates from restaurants is like 1%. And then you have in-home. I believe in-home has actually been higher. So the argument is when you have big box stores like Target and Walmart and they're open and everyone has to go to a centralized store, you're increasing transmission. Are you nuts? This is a point that I brought up. Many people have brought up, actually. If you allow a mom and pop boutique shop to be open, when someone says, I need to go buy flowers, they interact with what, 3 or 4 people? But what happens if someone needs to buy flowers and you've closed all the small businesses down? Now everyone's going to Walmart and the person who needs flowers is bumping into the guy who's buying milk. That's just going to increase transmission. Centralizing this makes no sense. And it's funny, too. I love the out of context clips that see people fly around. You know, they'll take quotes from me out of context, claim that I'm insulting doctors and nurses for celebrating the arrival of the vaccine, which is just 100% false. I'm criticizing doctors and nurses who are dancing when people are crying as their loved ones die. Imagine dancing at a funeral. But anyway, I digress. My criticism for Antifa is that they were burning down, they were smashing small businesses. These rioters not necessarily Antifa, but the rioters in Minneapolis destroyed the dream bar of a local firefighter. And I say, if you're going to go around smashing up small businesses, you're the bad guy. In Seattle, they smashed up like a local electronics store and then threw all of the products in the middle of the street. Well, what are you doing, man? That's not a massive corporation. It's some dude trying to live his life and run a small business. They don't care. Apparently, they torched the goods in the middle of the street. Now, I tell you this. It's not just Antifa that has put the boot on the neck of the small business owner, of the regular, innocent, working class person just trying to survive. It's the cops. The Daily Mail says MAGA fans have taken to the streets in Oregon and California to show their support for Trump and to protest lockdown orders put in place amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Hundreds of anti-lockdown protesters were seen in Salem, Oregon on Thursday afternoon, many of whom were waving Trump flags as they urged officials to reopen businesses. Police declared the event unlawful and dispersed protesters with impact munitions and flashbang grenades after the group refused to leave downtown. I will say this for the Trump supporters, the same as I did for Antifa on the left. When they show up in Portland holding hands and singing Kumbaya and whatever, that's awesome. I actually support that 100%. And I've always supported that. The idea that you have a right to peaceably assemble, as per the Constitution, is true and correct. And the police should not be able to fire tear gas and rubber bullets or whatever at you simply because you're standing around. Now, a problem arises when people in that crowd start throwing bricks and Molotovs and water bottles and beans and cans of tuna and stuff like that. I don't know if they were actually throwing tuna cans. I'm pretty sure they were throwing beans, though. Now you've got violence popping up. The problem? Well, the cops need to stop it. The person is using the crowd as a human shield, and the leftist protesters weren't stopping them. So listen, if you're in a large group and someone throws a brick and you don't stop them, then the police have to stop them, and they're going to push through you to get to this person because you may be accidentally or inadvertently protecting them. But you know what I say? When the George Floyd protest started, you had a bunch of people show up and go on some bridge, and I think it was in Portland, and they all just laid down, put their hands behind their back. And I said, awesome. It's exactly what this country is about. I understand this country was founded on violence, revolution, but nonviolent civil disobedience in this day and age is one of the most effective tools for bringing about change. And that's a fact. You can be disruptive. You can get there's studies showing this. We've talked about it, that when you generate attention through nonviolent civil disobedience, people support you. They say they didn't hurt anybody. They came out. They said, here's our cause. The press covers it. You hear about it. It's on Twitter. And then you go, OK. When someone starts throwing bricks and Molotovs and fuel and explosives like they were doing in Portland, people stop supporting you. They say they're attacking, they're burning things, they're blowing things up. So when the cops come in to stop them, well, then people support the police. What happens now when it's the police who are destroying everything? That's interesting. They say several protesters became angered by the event being declared unlawful, and were pictured facing off with officers clad in riot gear. Others launched their own smoke grenades, and several people were arrested, according to local police. Meanwhile, other protesters assembled outside the gated mansion of Governor Kate Brown, claiming the Democrats' lockdown orders were a violation of their liberties. That's a fact. To the south in Pasadena, California, MAGA fans showed their support for Trump as he continues to cry foul about the results of the presidential election. So I'll tell you what's really fascinating. Trump supporters coming with their own smoke bombs. Trump supporters in Oregon. Now, I've heard conservatives say that wasn't our fault. That was an infiltrator. Because one of the people at the pro-Trump, it was a rally. It was like waving Trump flags, then blue line flags, very, right wing. Somebody bear maced police. And I've heard people say that wasn't conservatives. And I'm like, bro, that's exactly what Antifa says. So if you got a problem with someone bear macing cops at your rally, then you need to stop that person and help the cops arrest them. Just like I said, you got that video out of D.C. from back during the George Floyd riots. Some Antifa guy starts bashing the ground with a hammer to pull up bricks, and the protesters grab him and throw him to the police. The cops actually make sure to arrest the right guy and release those who got accidentally caught up in it. See, that is cool. The cops weren't attacking people. The cops took away the dude who was breaking just smashing things. And the protesters continued their protest. I don't agree with the ideology of many of these protesters, most of their ideology, the weird moral authoritarian wokeism. But I certainly agree with their right to protest and nonviolent civil disobedience. Now, you want to talk about clashes with cops specifically. And there's an interesting philosophical conundrum. It's one thing if you destroy property. It's one thing if you're destroying public streets. That belongs to all of us. We all contribute to that so we can have it. You can't claim to be advocating for a commune or community and then destroy what we, the community, actually paid for. But what happens when police are legitimately suppressing people's rights? Well, then you get a very serious problem. Oath breakers, cops who are not upholding the Constitution. In fact, they're trampling all over it. I don't know what you do at that point. I still don't think, I think violence is not correct. I believe it's not going to work. But there is a line. There is a line. I was talking with Vosh on the IRL podcast. This was a month or two ago. And he's a lefty guy. He voted for Biden. He's a prominent, I believe he's a libertarian socialist. Yes, that's a thing. And he was basically saying of course, there are instances where political violence is justified, say in, World War II Germany, if groups rose up against the establishment, the Nazis and things like that. And he's correct, 100%. We would have been, there was resistance. You ever see the movie Valkyrie? That was cool. People were trying to fight back. At a certain point, you must protect, I'll put it this way. Legality doesn't mean morally correct. And that's where the challenge comes in. If people are actually if these cops are committing crimes and violating the Constitution, what do you do? Now, there's an answer I can't give you. I know a lot of people want me to have that answer. I don't know. What I am saying is historically, we can look back and see that sometimes violence happens. And the Civil War was an instance where I think most people agree, that what Abraham Lincoln did was good. Even though it was, that's a tough call, isn't it? Abraham Lincoln, he shut down newspapers. He had no authority to do that. He arrested people, put them in prison for years without charge or trial. And Abraham Lincoln, it was essentially the initiator of the conflict. Now, you can argue history, and I'm not a historian, but the general idea is the Union troops at Fort Sumter refused to leave, even though these states said they seceded from the Union. So fighting broke out. I guess you can argue that, it was I believe it was South Carolina that initiated the conflict with the Union soldiers. But I digress. It was Abraham Lincoln who was stomping all over the Constitution. And we look at that like a good thing. Maybe in 100 years from now, we'll look back at the Constitution being trampled all over today and say it was the right thing. And everyone will just clap and cheer for it, depending on who wins. Abraham Lincoln spat on it, essentially. But for a good cause, right? To prevent the breakup of the Union. And there were some interesting conversations and writings about what was right and what was wrong. But it's a tough call. It is. And I would say I fear what's to come next. January 6th is around the corner. I certainly don't believe Trump is going to win. That's just me, and I've said it a million times. But Trump supporters, that's a different picture. I don't know what to expect, but I've talked to people who are adamant that Trump is absolutely going to win. And I said, maybe, but not in any constitutional way. And therein lies the issue. Many people on the right have pointed out Abraham Lincoln violated the Constitution to do what was right to preserve the Union. And now they're saying Trump should do the same thing. Look, in these states, in places like New York, the Constitution is mud. And I'm not saying that because I'm trying to disparage it. I think it's a fantastic document. And I think this country, the United States, has done a tremendous job of, interpreting it and trying to progress in certain ways. And we've not been perfect, but we've done a pretty great job. Lots of amendments in there, that have changed things and made things better. But now we're coming to this point where you have states that are acting in complete defiance of the Constitution. New York, California, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, etc. Well, less so Ohio, but many of these other states. And they've been ruled against several times. The Supreme Court, I believe, has even ruled against them in some capacities. But they don't care. They just keep doing it. Well, there's the argument. Is it better, because we're in a pandemic, that to preserve the safety of the Union, these leaders come together and defy the Constitution, same as Abraham Lincoln did? Well, Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. Or is it more important that Trump stand up defiantly and restore the rights granted to us under the Constitution? Therein lies the big problem, and it's always going to be an ideological split. In the Civil War, clearly slavery was a big issue that played into the idea of whether states had a right to control their own laws or there was a federal government that could supersede that. But slavery was the principal issue. Now you have the pandemic. And the question is, do you trust the government? This is the serious problem we're facing. These Trump supporters who are going out clearly do not. Why? It's not their fault. Anthony Fauci was flip-flopping over and over again. And I'm not trying to disparage the guy. I think he's just been wrong a lot. Now, that's okay to a certain degree because we learn things as time goes on. The problem is that Fauci has admitted now on more than one occasion that he was lying. He said in one interview the reason they weren't telling people to buy masks was because they wanted to make sure they could get the masks first. The healthcare workers would get the masks first. That makes sense. Healthcare workers are the ones who need the masks more than a regular, somebody who would like say works at home. And they didn't want to get them, all of them to get bought up. But you just told people not to trust you because you're probably lying. He then said, the herd immunity number, 60 to 70%, actually, it's much higher. I didn't think people could handle hearing it. And now I think they're ready. He said something to that effect. He also said it's time to do as you're told. So now you have people saying this dude's been lying. What else has he been lying about? And they're going out and they're protesting. There's a story. I don't have it pulled it up so you can fact check me, but like 60% of medical workers in Ohio are refusing to get the vaccine because of what they hear in the media, what they trust and don't trust. So what do you think is going to happen next? You can argue that there's a couple things you can argue. We're facing a pandemic, and I mean we're in it, and hospitals are getting overwhelmed, and people are dying left and right. That's not in dispute. There are a lot of people who say, oh, but they're comorbidities. They're really dying of something else. No, they're dying of COVID. And I made this very clear on the IRL show, which is hilarious because the Young Turks did a segment where they lied. And it's like the best they could do is just pretend I said things I didn't say. Because I tweeted, wow, 94, according to CNN, 94% of COVID deaths had comorbidities. That's all I said. And then a lot of people started saying, oh, because they really died from X. No. The way I described it is, look, if someone's like, there are a lot of people who are very sick, like renal failure, for instance, like those people probably aren't going to make it, but they get COVID and die and they say it's a COVID death. Right. I understand that that's really the line. You know what I mean? Because people are going to be like, come on, man. And there have been instances where people have like died in motorcycle accidents and they had COVID. So they marked, died with COVID or whatever. But comorbidities means they died from COVID exacerbated by, and we know most people who are dying have comorbidities. It's hilarious that that's supposed to, like, the Young Turks would try and twist that to make the claim that I was downplaying it or pretending like it wasn't happening. No, my point, as it's always been, is protect the vulnerable. Allow people to open their businesses and work because it doesn't make sense to destroy the lives of regular people because other people are vulnerable. It doesn't make sense. We should double our efforts in protecting the elderly and those with comorbidities, the majority of those who die. And then we should allow regular working class people to get back to work, wear masks, socially distance, and then we'll have a balance between protecting, the transfer of resources like food and water. If I say the economy, the left goes, duh, but the economy is just Walmart. Is Wall Street. It's really amazing how these people don't know what economy means. It means household management. It means, how do I get food to you? So people are about to be evicted. They're about to lose their homes. They're angry. They're protesting. And the cops are beating them down. You want something really fascinating? I give you our good friends, the Donald.win. This is a post from 13 hours ago where they say, for those of you who aren't aware, Patriot Prayer and Proud Boys had a planned march. Antifa showed up, and the cops showed up to protect Antifa and end the march. Antifa is instigating with paintball guns, and the cops are protecting Antifa and attacked vets. Police are not on our side. Do not cuck. Top comment says, police literally defending Antifa, firing gas on patriots, letting Antifa point guns at the patriots and won't do an effing thing to stop it. But they will start shoving and pushing the patriots and the vets. One person says, oath breakers get what they deserve. They're oath breakers. They're absolutely oath breakers. Now, as for the Georgia thing, Donald Trump tweeted that the election in Georgia was illegal and invalid. The runoff election coming up. And, let me show you this before I read Patrick Byrne's tweet. Trump said, before
President
even discussing...
Trump on Friday evening
the Hill always autoplaying. Trump says, before even discussing the massive corruption which took place in the 2020 election, which gives us far more votes than necessary to win, it must be noted the state legislatures were not in any way responsible for the massive changes made to the voting process, rules and regulations. Many made hastily before the election, and therefore the whole state election is not legal or constitutional. Additionally, the Georgia consent decree is unconstitutional, and the state 2020 presidential election is therefore both illegal and invalid. And that would include the two current senatorial elections. Now, the reason why he's correct in one point that The changes were not made by the legislature. Now, as to whether you want to make a fraud argument, that's something else, okay? And a lot of people are, sure, but I'm not bringing it up. I think we need to mention the constitutional process. State legislatures set the terms. If the Supreme Court of these states and the governors change the rules, okay, that's not what our federal constitution permits. Okay, it's Elector Clause Act, Section 2 or whatever. But he brings up the current senatorial elections are invalid. Well, the current runoff elections are happening because of the actual election. So if there's an invalidation to the presidential election, it could potentially invalidate the initial senatorial elections. I don't necessarily think so, because you can argue at a federal level, there's rules and regulations how the state legislature can determine its elections, but the state itself determines, their senators. So that's different. Even if they invalidate the existing presidential election at a constitutional level for the federal government, I don't think that would change the rules at the state level for who actually won. So in that capacity, I think Trump is arguably incorrect. But I was saying, what I was trying to clarify when I say it was correct was that the Constitution says state legislatures decide. There's lawsuits going on right now because state legislatures have not changed the rules, but governors and courts did. There's an actual excellent constitutional legal challenge there. Now, let's combine these things. Patrick Byrne, who's the former CEO of Overstock, I believe, and a very prominent individual who's tweeting some really crazy things, and honestly, I just don't believe. He said, when Americans learn what I learned this morning from a federally certified forensic document examiner about certain ballots in certain counties in a certain state, they're going to lynch every politician involved in the scheme, starting with a certain governor and secretary of state. He corrected governor. Everything has to go through lawyers before release. Sorry, I can only drop you appetizers. I don't buy it. I don't believe it. And I'm not interested. Listen, I don't know what y'all can expect, but I just keep hearing all this crazy stuff about what's really going to happen. I don't think at a constitutional or legal level, judiciary level, there's going to be changes that help Trump. I do think possibly there are some issues that may arise with Trump supporters marching through the streets. That's the important point. Take a look at this. Maybe I'll talk a little bit more about it later. The Secret Service is making changes to the presidential detail because they're concerned Secret Service members are currently aligned with Trump. There's two trains of thought on this. One is, what is going on? Why are they concerned that these members are aligned with Trump? Is Trump going to stage a coup or something? And other people say this is totally normal. It happens all the time. And these reports, like from the Washington Post, who originated this, are just trying to freak you out. We will see on January 6th. It's a rude awakening for Trump supporters to see what happens when you fight for your rights and the police show up. They'll defend the state. And many people have been calling that out for some time, including Black Lives Matter and Antifa. The issue is, you don't have a right to destroy someone's business. If you want to protest the police, fine. Defunding the police is insane. When you talk about how many unarmed individuals were killed by cops, it's relatively low, according to the Washington Post, Black Lives Matter, and the Wall Street Journal. And so often what I've said is, police reform, yes. Police accountability, yes. All cops are not bad, and defunding the police is stupid. If anything, we need more funding for training. In New York City, cops were trying to shoot at some guy, and they shot bystanders because they are poorly trained. But they don't get it. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.